They were Hollywood's most famous duo, but also its most rumored. From the unusual friendship between a powerful white artist and a bold black star, to the whispers about motivations, sexuality, and the hidden power within the Rat Pack, the gossip never stopped. Frank Sinatra was always silent, but just before he died, he said one single sentence, a sentence that left his loved ones speechless and made outsiders reconsider everything. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't a confession. It was an affirmation, in a way that only Sinatra could. In 1941, backstage at the Michigan Theater in Detroit, a charismatic young singer named Frank Sinatra walked into the break room. He was the lead singer of the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra, a rising star in American music.
I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar.
Also performing that night was the Will Maston Trio, a little-known black group that included 16-year-old Sammy Davis Jr. During intermission, Sinatra and Davis happened to be sharing a sandwich. It was the first time they spoke, and from there, a bond was formed. Davis, since childhood, was a huge fan of Sinatra. He kept all the articles written about Sinatra in a separate notebook to show his grandmother, not because of his fame, but because Davis recognized in Sinatra something that black artists at that time could not have: stage power, the right to speak, and the right to be respected.
You make me feel that spring has sprung, and every time I...
In the context of racism still present everywhere in America, with theaters, hotels, restaurants clearly divided between whites and people of color, it was not common for an artist like Sinatra to take the initiative to sit down to eat, chat, and be friendly with Davis. In the early 1940s, the two had not worked together, but Sinatra's influence on Davis was growing quietly. When Davis was drafted into the Army in 1944, he faced racism head-on. Beaten, threatened, and treated as invisible, Davis chose to use his performing talent to defend himself. He became an entertainer for soldiers, not to make money, but to ease the hatred. During that time, Davis watched and rewatched the short film The House I Live in which Sinatra appeared and called on Americans to eliminate racial prejudice.
Do you think maybe if your father knew about it in time, he would rather have died than to take blood from a man of another religion? Would you have wanted him to die? Would your mom want him to die?
The film won an honorary Oscar and became a symbol of the progressive spirit of the time. For Davis, it was not just a work, but a personal message that he felt was directed to him. After his discharge and his return to the stage with the Will Maston Trio, Davis continued to closely follow Sinatra's every move. He made no secret of the fact that he imitated the way Sinatra dressed, walked, and even did his hair. Not to copy, but to learn, because for Davis, that was the model of the artist he wanted to become. Unbound by skin color, unbound by space, and able to reach any audience with his true talent. This was also the time when social connections began to form among the famous artists. Sinatra became a sought-after name in Hollywood and New York. Davis was still a minor figure in the black vaudeville scene, but his respect for Sinatra never faded. In turn, Sinatra began to notice Davis as a young artist with special abilities. In 1947, Sinatra performed at the Capitol Theater in New York, one of the most prestigious venues in America. When asked who he wanted to open the night, Sinatra named the Will Maston Trio, which included Davis. But he didn't just introduce them. Sinatra demanded 5 times the group's fee, an unusual request that the theater had to agree to in order to keep its headliner. The move immediately exposed Davis to a white audience that was unfamiliar with and even wary of black performers. It wasn't just a performance, it was a leap forward in his journey to breaking free from invisible boundaries. 7 years later, when Davis was in a serious car accident in 1954, losing his left eye and nearly breaking down physically and mentally, Sinatra paid for his medical bills. Davis had no idea where he would go when he left the hospital. Sinatra called him and told him to come to Palm Springs, to his house. During that period, Sinatra's girlfriend at the time, Cindy Bays, had to convince him to go to the hospital. He was afraid of the smell of hospitals, but he did. And when Davis was so depressed that he thought about dying, it was Sinatra who kept him there. Davis later said, "When I lost my eye, the first place I went was Frank's house in Palm Springs, because I had nowhere else to go." That line needed no embellishment, because it said it all. Around this time, Davis began to perform more independently. He was gaining attention from both critics and the public. But to truly establish himself in the entertainment world, he needed a presence in Las Vegas, the biggest entertainment center in the country at the time. But Vegas was still a deeply segregated city. Black artists like Davis could perform at the big casinos, but had to sleep in the black-only areas outside the city center. This went on for years, until Sinatra began to make his voice heard. He refused to perform at places that would not let Davis stay in the same hotel. He demanded that the management of the Sands Hotel let Davis stay in the same room, or else the show would be canceled. Sands complied, and the move set a precedent. From then on, Davis was no longer a stranger in Las Vegas. In 1958, Davis found himself at the center of controversy when he began dating white actress Kim Novak. The relationship was met with fierce opposition from the studio and the public, especially in states where interracial marriage was still prohibited. Some sources say that Sinatra stood up to protect Davis from pressure from Columbia Pictures, where Kim Novak was a star, and it is said that he spoke directly to the studio's head to calm the situation. While the extent of his involvement is not entirely clear, the fact that Davis was not locked out of Hollywood in the midst of the storm suggests that Sinatra's influence formed a strong protective circle. That same year, the Rat Pack was formed, a group of performers that included Sinatra, Davis, Dean Martin, Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop. The group was originally called the Klan, but Davis objected to the association with the Ku Klux Klan. Sinatra agreed to change it to Rat Pack, but being the leader of the group, Sinatra always gave Davis space to express himself, although sometimes with jokes about his skin color or the way he spoke. Many people thought the Rat Pack used Davis as a badass to attract attention, but to long-term observers, Davis was never pushed aside. He was considered an integral part of the Rat Pack structure, and Sinatra created that position. There are also suggestions, but that Sinatra had a plan, that Davis's inclusion was not just a matter of friendship, but also a way to present himself as progressive and non-racist, and thereby gain the admiration of Hollywood's intellectual and left-wing elites. These theories are not entirely unreasonable, especially given Sinatra's later political moves. But if it was a ploy, it was one that Davis profited from, with opportunities, fame, and protection that few black artists of the time had. For more than a decade, Sinatra not only protected Davis from the glare of criticism, but also paved the way for him. It was not a promise, not a contract, but a series of concrete, consistent actions, backstage and on stage, and that was what made their friendship something more than just artist and patron. But the closeness between the two men began to create cracks, both outside and within the Rat Pack. The joke and apology lasted for months. During the Rat Pack's heyday, their Las Vegas shows were considered the epicenter of American entertainment culture. The group's members not only performed music, but also juggled humor and constantly joked, making the audience always feel like they were entering an intimate, unscripted party. Sammy Davis Jr., with his all-round performance ability, was the brightest factor on stage. But it was in that space that the imbalance between him and the other members began to be clearly revealed. Davis was often the butt of racial jokes. Sinatra and Dean Martin sometimes called him Smokey, or made jokes about his skin color, his voice, even his physique. Under the stage lights, Davis laughed along, reacting as if it were part of the act. The audience roared. The press called it a no-holds-barred camaraderie, and promoters continued to exploit the formula for success. But behind the scenes, Davis was not always comfortable. In the African American community at the time, especially among civil rights activists, Davis was increasingly criticized. People called him Uncle Tom, a term for a black person who would bend over backwards and endure humiliation to please white people. There were public articles asking, why did Davis, a famous artist, allow himself to be made a laughingstock at a time when the whole country was struggling against racial prejudice? Davis did not answer. He continued to stand on stage, continued to perform with the Rat Pack. But inside, conflicts began to accumulate. In 1959, tensions reached a boiling point. Davis appeared on a radio show called The Shay Show in Chicago. In the interview, he talked about Sinatra, praising him as an early mentor while also criticizing his rude and disrespectful behavior in certain situations. The comments quickly reached Sinatra. The reaction was almost immediate. Sinatra became angry, calling Davis, using words that insiders said were racist. Davis was immediately fired from the Rat Pack's film Never So Few. In the months that followed, every door Sinatra could control was closed to Davis. Davis tried to make amends. He apologized to Sinatra in letters, through intermediaries, and in person. He refused to meet. Only after Dean Martin intervened and Peter Lawford mediated did Sinatra agree to let Davis back in, before filming began on Ocean's 11. But their relationship was never quite the same. Davis understood that he needed Sinatra, not just for his work, but for what he stood for. In an interview years later, Davis admitted that he crossed the line and said something he shouldn't have. But he also left behind a telling line, "I know who's in charge, and I know where I stand." This moment marked a turning point in the public perception of the Davis-Sinatra relationship. It was no longer a romantic relationship between two friends who crossed racial barriers. In reality, power was still in the hands of one side, and Davis, no matter how talented, had to be careful about how he expressed his opinions if he wanted to maintain his place in the group. Years later, members of the Rat Pack would occasionally recall the incident without going into detail. But according to Peter Lawford, that was when Sinatra was most demanding and tough on Davis. And Davis himself took it all in as long as he had the chance to be on stage with the group. After the radio feud of 1959, Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. entered a new phase of their relationship. More reserved, less openly emotional, but actions spoke volumes. Though his anger in cutting Davis off from a major film, Sinatra let Davis return to the Rat Pack, showing that the lines between friendship and power within the group were not negotiable, if Davis knew how to walk the line. Silent allies. During the early 1960s, both men were heavily involved in the civil rights movement. Sinatra used his influence to organize a benefit concert for Martin Luther King Jr. at Carnegie Hall in 1961, an unprecedented event with mainstream entertainment. Davis, now a nationally recognized figure, also performed and raised money at other events. Behind the scenes, the two pressed Las Vegas hotels and casinos to hire more black employees and end segregation in service and lodging. One of the most concrete actions came at the Sands Hotel, where the Rat Pack performed regularly. When a black couple was refused entry because of their skin color, Sinatra stopped the show and demanded that management change their policy if they wanted him to continue his contract. As a result, the hotel changed its rules, no longer barring black people from the performance area. Davis witnessed the whole thing, saying nothing publicly, but later said in an interview, "Frank didn't have to tell me anything. I saw him do it." When John F. Kennedy was elected president in 1960, both Sinatra and Davis were vocal supporters. Sinatra used all his influence to rally Hollywood to Kennedy's side. Davis, meanwhile, was set to perform at the president's inauguration. But when news of Davis's marriage to white actress Mae Britt became public, Kennedy canceled his performance without explanation. Advisors feared the image would negatively affect his political standing in the southern states. Davis was devastated. He didn't say much, but according to close friends, He felt like he had been excluded from the game he had helped build. Sinatra, though still supportive of Kennedy, gradually distanced himself from the White House after the incident. Sources say he never forgave Kennedy for his treatment of Davis, and Sinatra's relationship with the First Family cooled from then on. Again, Sinatra didn't say anything, but chose to withdraw. In 1963, when Sinatra's son, Frank Sinatra Jr., was kidnapped, Davis was one of the first people to be by his side. In the midst of the chaos, Davis kept in touch with the Rat Pack, helping to keep the Sinatra family's spirits up during the search. There were no public statements of thanks, no public photos, but insiders confirmed that Davis was always there. It was in these private moments that their relationship showed its true nature, unpretentious, unspoken. In the 1970s, Sinatra changed his political orientation, switching from Democrat to Republican. He became quieter on racial issues, while Davis continued to participate in programs calling for equality, even though the two did not distance themselves. Even in 1972, when Davis caused controversy by hugging President Richard Nixon at a public event, causing a backlash in the black community, Sinatra was the one who advised him to just live with your choices. A few years later, when both were past their prime, they met again in a situation far removed from the spotlight. In 1987, the son of Dean Martin, the other remaining Rat Pack brother, died in a plane crash. Davis was being treated for laryngeal cancer, and Sinatra was in poor health. But they agreed to reunite for an international tour with Liza Minnelli. Many called it the last Rat Pack reunion. Though their voices were no longer sharp, their steps were no longer decisive. The spirit between them was still clear. Stand together until they could stand no longer. Unspoken declaration. On May 16, 1990, Sammy Davis Jr. died of laryngeal cancer, ending a career spanning more than 60 years as one of the most influential black artists in American history. Shortly after the news broke, Frank Sinatra canceled all his performances for the week and flew to California. At the funeral, he didn't just sit in the front row, he was a pallbearer. And when asked to speak, he simply said, "It's hard to sum up a friendship of more than 40 years in a few words. I wish the world could have known Sammy the way I did." Years later, scholars and journalists began to revisit the key moments in the lives of the two men. One of the most cited sources is the memoir, Sammy Davis Jr., A Personal History with My Father, 2014, written by Davis's daughter, Tracy Davis. In it, Tracy recounts that her father was always grateful to Sinatra for opening the door for him, giving him the opportunity to step out of the dark side of segregation, but also felt conflicted about the jokes, pressure, and unspoken control he endured during their time together. Davis understood that this was part of the price of wanting to be on the same level as white artists, especially in an era when one wrong move could ruin an entire career. Sinatra made no further statements about Davis in his later years. After 1990, he largely withdrew from the stage. His declining health limited his public appearances. When he died on May 14, 1998, 8 years to the day after Davis's, newspapers recounted their relationship as a testament to a friendship that transcended prejudice, politics, race, and industry gossip. FBI documents released after Sinatra's death make no mention of any serious internal conflict between the two. There is no record of Sinatra ever expressing remorse for his behavior toward Davis, nor is there any hard evidence that the two were romantically involved, as some rumors have suggested. Such stories, from sexual orientation to power dynamics, exist largely in the gray areas of the public imagination, with no trace in the actual records. What makes one believe that Sinatra confirmed his friendship with Davis comes not from words, but from the way he has behaved consistently over more than 50 years. He could be hot-tempered, controlling, and rude, but he was also the one who stood up for Davis when he needed him. He might not deny rumors, but he never left Davis alone when he was attacked. And while there were tense periods, the distance between them never lasted very long. The relationship between Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. may never have been defined by a single statement, but that doesn't matter, because Sinatra's final words at Davis's funeral, "I wish the world had known Sammy the way I did," were his way of confirming that behind all that had been said, all that had been rumored, all that had been argued about, there was only one thing left: respect and true friendship. If you find what these two people went through memorable, feel free to leave a comment to share your thoughts. Like if you appreciate this kind of friendship, share to spread the story to more people, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on meaningful behind-the-scenes journeys like this.